Amanda Rivera. Excuse me. I'm the hearing examiner presiding over today's hearing. The date is December 21st, 2023, and this is case DCi2023-00009. Because it is a quasi-judicial hearing, all evidence and testimony must be taken under oath. So if you intend to speak, if you could please raise your hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you will provide is the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any members of the public here today? No, we do not. So I will dispense with those instructions and we can begin with the applicant. Good morning.
All right, good morning. Good morning, Madam Hearing Examiner. For your record, my name is Richard Aiken. I'm here this morning representing MCI and Bell, LLC, who's the applicant in this matter. First of all, just a couple of housekeeping matters. We submitted a 48-hour letter, and there were several issues raised therein. I think we've resolved all but one of the issues. So the first issue was clarification on the site development regulations. Specifically, the applicant pointed out that the perimeter setback should only apply to the perimeter of the site and should not have subcategories for street, side, rear, water body, or preserve. That was resolved with staff, and so there were in staff's submittal with the conditions, there were some strike-through underlines on page 6 of their response for the site development regulations to clarify that. So we were in agreement with that. The specific part on page 6. There's one other issue with regard to what they submitted on the sewer treatment plant that we'll get to later. The second issue was regarding the minimum open space and the wording of condition 3. Staff and the applicant have agreed to changes on the wording of condition 3, and I have a copy of the new proposed condition 3 that we discussed yesterday, and I provided that to Ms. Workman. So if I could provide you with that.
Yes, please.
I've got a clean copy as well as the strike-through underline of it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And so this will be a composite applicant's exhibit 1 for condition 3. Okay.
So in addition to the change to condition 3, there was another change to the master concept plan that we agreed upon and provided with staff. So there was a statement added to the master concept plan that development parcels are required to provide a minimum of 10% open space under the open space table provided. So that was added to the master concept plan. I do have a copy of the full-size master concept plan that I'd like to provide you, and it has that change to it. All right.
And we can address this later, but there were, I think, 2 comments that you said they were out of compliance with the master concept plan. Does this, to your knowledge, resolve both?
Yes.
Okay. And that would be applicant's exhibit 2 is the revised master concept plan. Do you happen to have this in 11 by 17 as well, or just the large version?
I believe we do.
That would be excellent. If not, I can get it emailed after the fact. Thank you. Perfect.
So the remaining issue that was raised in the 48-hour notice and the staff response is the request to bring deviation 2 from the existing zoning forward. That would allow for an on-site sewage treatment plant. We still are not in agreement on that. The plan is to go through our presentation and then address that issue last, since we are basically in agreement on everything else. The last thing I have for you before we get started is a copy of the applicant's PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you. That will be applicant exhibit 3. Thank you. Okay.
All right, so with that, I will turn it over to Mr. DeLisi to go through our presentation. Thank you.
I'm going to take one moment before you get started. There were a few documents I left at my desk that I want to have. Give me 1 second. Okay, thank you.
For the record, Dan DeLisi, I'm a land use planner and a consultant for the applicant in this case. So I'm going to go through this presentation after I'm done, Drew Fitzgerald is going to come up and go through the deviations. And then we have Shane and Yuri that are going to talk about environment and transportation in that order. So the property is located on the south side of State Road 82, approximately 1.5 miles east of Alabama Road, which runs up north into Lehigh Acres, and 1.25 miles west of Homestead, which you'll see right here, which also runs north into Lehigh Acres. You can see Lehigh Acres dips south of State Road 82 in this location, and all of this, as with most of Lehigh Acres, was at one point in the urban community land use category as part of that whole area of Lehigh Acres. On the north side, there is residential on the north side. You can see the RM2 zoning, C1A zoning. There's commercial on the east side. Again, residential on the west, and this is a Lamson restoration area right on the west. To the south of the property is density reduction groundwater resource area. And this is vacant land. It's owned by Lee County. Actually, not sure what the utilization is, but the property is currently zoned mixed-use plan development. So we've approached this as an amendment to the plan development, but we're doing two things specifically. We're taking in this parcel that was left out at the corner of Blackstone and State Road 82, and we're changing up the mix of uses. So the zoning DCi2023-00009 permitted 810,000 square feet of industrial, 200,000 square feet of office, and 250,000 square feet of retail. So there was a pretty significant commercial component anyways, but it was definitely more heavily focused on industrial. We're proposing to change up that mix of uses and make it more retail and less industrial. Again, so the proposed amendment is to add this 5-acre property that's here and change the request to 500,000 square feet of commercial, retail, or office, and 250,000 square feet of industrial uses. The idea is the power line is really the separation. This is an FPL power easement. To the south of that is the industrial area. To the north of that is the commercial area. Property has two access points. One is directly to State Road 82. The other is to Blackstone Drive on the west. And you'll see that on the master concept plan, we've located all the common water management areas, the lakes in these locations, and also dry detention areas for pretreatment. The indigenous area is over here on the west. That was purposefully located, both because that's where the wetlands are located, but also it acts as a nice buffer area to the residential uses, which are to the west, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So the criteria of approval is found in LDC section 34-145. I'll just run through that quickly. We meet all these criteria. We are consistent with the comprehensive plan. We're located in the industrial future land use category here. And as I said before, urban community is all around us. You see this big wetland area on the future land use map is there. I'll start with the wetland and just say that that doesn't correspond to the actual wetland lines, and the wetland land use category, as you know, is really defers to South Florida Water Management District jurisdictional determination. So that line moves as our wetland permitting demonstrates where the line is. This small portion of the property is in the urban community land use category, and what the history of this is the entire property was in the urban community land use category. Subsequent to the initial zoning of the property as predominantly industrial, there was a county-initiated comprehensive plan amendment that changed the property to industrial. And I think that was probably done just because that's what the zoning said it was, and the county wanted to locate more industrial areas on the future land use map. Now, the industrial future land use category allows for 20% of the area of industrial within each planning community to be utilized for commercial uses. So when we started this comp plan amendment, when we started this zoning amendment, we weren't sure if we actually needed a comp plan amendment to do it. We met with planning staff, worked with Brandon Dunn and Rick Burris to look at what was going on in the Lehigh Acres community and if we actually could do it without doing a plan amendment. And they came to the conclusion, as did I, that we meet the 20%. We're well under. Currently, Lehigh Acres is well under that 20%. So with the addition of this commercial area, we are consistent with that future land use category. Urban community, you're allowed both industrial and commercial uses in the urban community. It's characterized as a mixture of relatively intense commercial and residential areas, and that's why you see everything going on around us. We're also consistent with a number of other policies, goals, objectives, and policies in the LEAD plan. Objectives 2.1 and 2.2 talk about development, location, and timing. Again, we're in an urban area. We're surrounded by urban designated uses, if not actual built urban uses, and so we meet that. All of the rest of the policies listed, I'll just sum up to say they speak to compatibility, landscaping, making sure you have surrounding uses and need. As I said before, we're in a location, and urban services are available. As I said before, we're in a location where, or the site lends itself to buffer surrounding uses quite nicely. We have the preserve area on the west-hand side, which is where the residential uses are. DRGR to the south, which is vacant property, and that's where the industrial is. So the industrial is nicely isolated from any residential use, won't have an impact on residential uses. There's nothing to the south that it's going to impact, and to the west as well. The commercial is buffered from the residential by that wetland area, and then you have State Road 82 to the north. So it's a fairly isolated or well-isolated property from that standpoint. So there aren't any concerns really for any off-site impacts with regard to compatibility. We have direct access to State Road 82. Yuri will talk about transportation, but we have infrastructure in place. We do have letters of availability from the service providers that has become a point of some disagreement with our deviation that we wanted to carry over from the last zoning, and we can talk about that more later. But urban services are in place, and certainly if they weren't in place at the time of development order, in other words, capacity wasn't available in the sewer system, we can provide that. So we will be served by urban services. And then finally, this property is partially in the Lehigh Acres commercial overlay because they touched this little area because that little area was still in commercial, it's zoned commercial. But the point of the overlay is really to get as much commercial as possible in Lehigh Acres because of the lack of commercial. It's not to exclude commercial. In fact, their policy 2.25.6, I believe it's 2, the policy after this talks about that. So adding additional commercial to Lehigh Acres certainly implements what they are trying to achieve in the Lehigh Acres plan. We did have a meeting with Lehigh Acres, and it was seen as very favorable. They want more commercial in the area. Surrounding uses and compatibility, I already went through all of this. there aren't any compatibility concerns. And again, this area is Lamson, this is vacant. It's really only this area we have some concern with industrial, but all of our preserve areas there, so it creates a really nice buffer from those units. Another criteria is access points. Again, our access directly to Blackstone and State Road 82, which is a arterial road in Lee County. The next criteria is no impact to environmentally critical or sensitive lands. Shane will address this in more detail, but we are not having an impact to environmentally sensitive or critical lands through this zoning. And with that, I will end my presentation and hand it over to Drew to talk about the deviations.
Thank
And
you.
if you have any questions.
Not at this time, no, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. For the record, I'm Drew Fitzgerald. I'm a licensed professional engineer. I've been accepted as an expert witness in civil engineering before in this forum. I would ask that you do so today. Thanks. Yes, thanks. All right. So what I'd like to do is, if I could, start with the new deviations and then end up the presentation with the ones that are carryovers from before. So starting with deviation number 3, and I'll toggle over to the master concept plan. So deviation number 3 is asking for a deviation from the required setback of a lake from the property line. In this case, we're asking for it along this eastern property line as well as along the south property line. We're asking to deviate from 50 feet to 25 feet. We're trying to maximize the amount of fill that we can get from the lakes, and that'll keep the truck traffic off the roadways. There are no negative impacts to the public health, safety, and welfare for this deviation. There's some existing canals that are running along those property lines, so the only traffic that should be utilizing those areas are maintenance facilities for the Lamson canals. The deviation number 4, allow for connection separation of 59 feet from an adjacent it's basically a service driveway on Blackstone. So that is right here where this access is. We're trying to keep the access as far away from State Road 82 as possible so that we have the room to put in turn lanes and stuff when that's needed for the development. So we've got it to this very edge of this property line, which puts us within 59 feet of what's considered basically just a service driveway to some, I think, monitoring stations for that restoration area. Deviation number 5 is allowing for a combination of preservation, restoration, and upland preservation credits to meet indigenous preservation requirements. So we're required to provide 50% of our open space as indigenous. We have asked for a deviation to allow us to utilize the wetlands as part of that, which typically it's got to be uplands for that. But in this case, the higher value property is, or land is with the wetlands, and it's interspersed with some upland preserve areas. Those areas do have some impacts due to Melaleuca and other exotics, so we are going to be restoring that, and there was a restoration plan provided as part of that. But the byproduct of allowing for this deviation is that we get to put the preserve between the residential and the development, and it's also along Blackstone, kind of separates that neighborhood from the commercial and industrial in the future. Deviation 1, that is really just, we have some roadways that we're really just going to be utilizing on one side of the road, so like especially along this preserve. So there is no need for a PUE on this side, and it would just eat up into what's being impacted of the indigenous. So we've asked for a deviation on that, and that was approved previously. And then finally is deviation number 2, which is the sewage treatment plant. We have asked if we could keep that deviation. Staff and the applicant are not in agreement on that. There is a letter of availability that we did receive, and there are utilities available for us to connect to. What we're concerned about is that the letter of availability is not really a commitment, so things can change, and there's a lot of development pressure in Lehigh. We have experienced a situation where FGUA was not able to sign some of our DEP applications for a project in this area, simply because their records with DEP are not the greatest. So that's really just a concern on our part. It was part of the approval previously, and we would just like to preserve that if we preserve that as part of this approval.
Do we want to talk about do you have extensive presentation about that? I know you added a witness from the Utilities Department. Do you intend to call him in your primary testimony?
I can. He's here for questions just on the relationship between LCU and FGUA and what's going on with that. And I do have a small bit to add to from the previous record from the zoning case on what happened during that to establish this condition.
Because for my findings, and just so you know where I'm at in my review of this, in order to find it consistent with the LEED plan and to grant the deviation, because that's what you need to meet the deviation criteria, the LEED plan's pretty clear throughout, as you know, that they don't want treatment plants and they don't want septic. So it was approved previously, but from my understanding of the record, that was required because FGUA didn't have service availability at that time, but now they do. So like standard, what is it? Even the development timing of 2.2 and 2.2.1 and 4.1.2, I mean, when you look at it throughout, 4.1.2, I think, is the one that we particularly got the problem with under subsection 2, that if it's within the quarter mile, you've got to connect. And so if it's a timing issue, I could foresee potentially, I guess, a condition on a deviation that says, if you find yourself at the development order, because it's really a development order issue, but because you need the deviation, we've got to talk about it now. So I want to be sure we cover all the bases, but to make the findings that I need to have that kind of testimony in the record. So I just need to understand if there is a legitimate timing issue that you think you're going to be coming in for this before FGUA can actually service it, because the letter that I've got says that there is availability. So I do need that flushed out, but if it's going to be addressed in yours, we don't need to have the conversation right now. I want to be sure we cover
I have some
everything.
history, and then I can bring kind of the same light that you're speaking to with my testimony.
Okay, so we can just put a pin in that for now, if you'd like. Thank you. Who did we have next? Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Shane Johnson with Passarella and Associates for the record. Project ecologist. I have been accepted as an expert in environmental issues in the past. My resume is on file and would like to respectfully request to be accepted today. Okay, this is basically all the environmental kind of condensed into one slide, so I'll break this down for you. I know there's a lot of information here. So for any zoning case, really, we prepare a flux map for the property, which is a land use and vegetative cover map. This is sort of a summary of all that, based or broke down by color. So the orange areas that you see here are upland areas that represent approximately 91 acres of the property, or the majority of the property. That's primarily pine habitat and pine flatwoods habitat types. You got some other disturbed land and a power easement running through the property as well, but primarily pine type habitats. Those are the orange areas. So the green areas are the wetlands, the limits of which were approved in the field by the South Florida Water Management District back in March 2023. Those are fixed, representing about 6.8 acres of the property. And you have surface waters, which are the blue areas. Those are kind of difficult to see because they're small in nature. They're just ditches along State Road 82, here, 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 and a small cow pond, because there is cattle utilizing the property. Again, those limits of the OSWs or surface waters were approved by the Water Management District. So you also see a hatch pattern here, this kind of horizontal diagonal hatch pattern that represents the non-indigenous areas. Those are areas that do not meet the definition of indigenous per the code. So those are areas that contain greater than 75% exotic vegetation. You've got the limit of the preserve area that was noted by others in the presentation. The preserve totals 12.1 acres total. And as you can see, some of the non-indigenous areas fall within the preserve. In fact, it's more than 50% of the preserve. And that leads into the deviation that Mr. Fitzgerald talked about, deviation number 5. Since we have high levels of exotic vegetation that do not meet the county definition of indigenous, that deviation was required. And in addition to that, a restoration management plan for the preserve area was required by staff to demonstrate that these areas will be restored to indigenous vegetation. And that management plan is attached to the staff report as Exhibit B. So that pretty much outlines the methods for exotic removal, primarily Melaleuca and Brazilian pepper, and some supplemental plantings that will bring these areas up to meet the definition of indigenous. So Passarella, as part of the zoning application, we also conducted a Lee County protected species survey on the property. There was a total of 11 gopher tortoise burrows observed on site. These are the green dots noted here on the map, and 1 wood stork right here in the wetland. Since there was protected species utilization of the site, a management plan is required to be provided at the time of DO. So that will outline the management activities for these species. Just a quick note, I wanted to note a discrepancy between what's shown on this map as far as the gopher tortoise burrows is concerned and what our report says. Our report is attached to the staff report as Exhibit A, but the report notes 10 gopher tortoise burrows. There's actually 11 in preparation for this hearing. I noted the difference, and I just wanted to outline the discrepancy in the hearing today. So whether it's 10 or 11 burrows, a management plan is still required. And essentially what that will entail is obtaining a permit from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission to move those tortoises off-site. And as part of that permit process, we're required to update the survey, so the burrow count may change regardless. So I just wanted to make that point for the record. So unless you had any further questions, that's all I had.
I think that the only question I had was about the protected species. There was a couple of mentions that there were none, but then there was the report that showed that there were, but you've explained that today, so I don't have any additional questions
Okay.
about that. Thank you.
Okay, again, the report is attached to the staff report as Exhibit A, so that's in there.
Yes, I reviewed it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Good morning.
Good morning. For the record, Yuri Baika with TR Transportation Consultants. I've been sworn in and previously accepted as an expert in transportation planning, and would like to be accepted as one today as well.
Yes, thank you.
We prepared a traffic study for this rezoning application. As part of our traffic study, we first prepared a trip generation comparison analysis between the proposed and existing zoning on the subject property, because I know the hearing examiner always has a question, well, how does it compare in terms of traffic, what's currently approved to what we're proposing? And so we prepared a trip generation analysis based on that, which was prepared consistent with the latest IT trip generation manual, which is again a required source for us to use to come up with traffic projections for projects. And table 4 here below shows you that trip generation comparison between the proposed and existing zoning on the subject property. And as you can see from table 4, during the AM peak hour, the trip generation actually being reduced as part of our rezoning request, and in PM peak hour it's being increased, as well as the daily traffic as well. So I just wanted to make sure you're aware of this. And again, that's majorly due because we're increasing the commercial retail component and reducing the industrial component. And as part of our traffic study, we prepared our typical link level service analysis on all the surrounding roadway network that will be impacted by this project. And the results of our link level service analysis indicated SR82, which is a recently widened 4-lane divided arterial, will operate at acceptable level service B both with and without the project in the future project traffic conditions. And Parkdale Boulevard, which is a collector roadway opposite of Blackstone Drive, will operate at a future level service C without the project and level service D with the project again, these are acceptable level of service standards for these roadways. And the staff has reviewed our traffic report and agrees that this project will not have a detrimental impact on the surrounding roadway network system. And again, we still have to prepare another traffic study once we go through the development order process with the county, as well as site permitting, access permitting process with Florida Department of Transportation. At that time, we'll prepare a very detailed traffic study that will look at the need for turn lane improvements and any other site-related improvements as well, based on a more specific development on the subject property. At this time, we prepared a traffic study based on the absolute worst-case scenario as required for the rezoning traffic studies. And so in my professional opinion, this project is consistent with the transportation element of the LEAP plan as well as the land development code. That concludes my part of presentations. Do you have any questions?
I do not, thank you.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Richard Aiken again for the record. So briefly on deviation 2 before we turn it over to the county. I wanted to make a couple of clarifications here. So number one, we did have some discussions with staff about this. One of the concerns that staff raised was it's not shown on the master concept plan, and there was question of compatibility as to where we would put it. We did propose a condition to staff that would basically provide that if constructed, the facility would be located in industrial use area B on the master concept plan, okay? And for reference, that's here. And we can discuss that a little bit further after the county does their presentation. But the reason for putting it there was simply because due to the physical characteristics of the site, the Lambsig Canal down here and then the preserve over here to the, what would be the west, it would, there would be physical characteristics that would be good natural buffers from a compatibility standpoint if that's where it needed to go. I would also point out that, as Mr. Fitzgerald said, the reason for the request to bring the deviation forward, we understand that there is a letter of availability, but Mr. Fitzgerald has had some other projects where there have been issues at the time of development order where FGUA did not actually have the ability to provide capacity at that time, and it delayed it by a significant amount of time, I believe, a year or so. And so the concern here is that if at the time of development order we run into that issue, we would like to have the ability to temporarily have an on-site package treatment facility that would allow for service to the project at the time of DO until the actual capacity became available by FGUA. And we believe that from a zoning standpoint, we certainly understand the need for the discussion about the deviation right now, especially given the things that the hearing examiner raised. However, the review of the specifics of the design of the plant and all that would really be a development order issue, not a zoning issue. So do understand those distinctions and point that out. So as far as the actual deviation goes, we do agree there would have to be a condition on the deviation that would basically provide for the fact that it would be temporary only in the event that there was not capacity from FGUA at the time of the local development order, and that it would be temporary only until such time as it became available. We're hoping that that wouldn't be the case, and this would be a completely unnecessary conversation to have had in the first instance. There is the existing, I've got a copy of the existing zoning if you'd like to have it. I believe you probably already do in your materials, but there is, the deviation 2 did have a condition attached to it which said a sanitary sewage facility would be allowed for the proposed development to provide a sanitary sewage package treatment facility until sufficient capacity becomes available to serve the proposed development. So that's how it read in the existing approval. There may need to be some additional language here, and we're happy to have that conversation. With that, I'm going to turn it over. I believe Mr. Inge would like to say a few words before we let the county get up. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning, I'm hearing examiner. My name is Ron Inge. I'm a part owner of and a principal of MCI and Bell, the applicant. I also, my resume is on file with the hearing examiner's office. I've been recognized as an expert in land development and development related issues and mining issues, and would ask to be recognized as such today as well.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. As everyone has mentioned, part of the reason and the majority reason for some of these changes is we were able to acquire this out parcel right here that previously we did not have back when I zoned this property back at around 2007 or 8. One of the challenges that this property has faced is the access. This access has been there, but previously it went right through the wetland areas through these lots along Blackstone Drive. That really wasn't an attractive location for that access, given what might occur on site. So we worked hard to acquire this piece, and as the site plan shows, we've moved it closer, as Drew mentioned, further back as far as we can along Blackstone to provide for stacking and turn lanes, but it provides much better access, and we'll get much more interest from folks. The reason why the sewage treatment plant issue is something that's germane and we've asked for, as a matter of background, I've operated 2 of those in the past, one at an industrial park and one in a residential subdivision, both in South Fort Myers. And as soon as Lee County Utilities had sewer service available, we removed those plants and connected, and oddly enough, it freed up land we could use it for other purposes, which would be the same case here. So having this strategy is not foreign to us. We've done it before. And the reason why I'd like to carry that condition forward is I'm going to be very intent on moving this project forward in the near future. There have been concerns expressed, as Mr. Fitzgerald said, about the ability for FGUA to provide that particular service. I know that Lee County's been in discussions about acquiring FGUA, helping supplement it. Those discussions have been going on for a decade or more, and it hasn't happened yet. So I'm not sure when that's going to happen, but this is just to allow us the possibility that if a Walmart or a Publix came in on the site and wanted to move forward rapidly, that in the event there was a problem with sewage treatment, we could address it temporarily until the public service was available. It's a temporary measure, so we're not planning on having that there other than for the length of time necessary to the public capacity is available. So that's the reason for asking for the request to carry that forward. If there's any question, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise,
No, thank you. I appreciate that.
thank you.
I just looked at my notes and I had one further point of clarification. When Mr. DeLisi stood up, he did tell you about his experience in land use planning, but I'm not sure he formally asked to be recognized as an expert, so I just want to make sure that you do that for the purposes of the record, that's
Yes.
all.
I don't recall either, but yes, I
All right.
do. Thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes our presentation at this time.
Okay, thank you. Whenever staff is ready then?
Yes.
Thank you, Beth.
For the record, my name is Beth Workman. I'm a principal planner in the zoning section. I have been accepted in this forum before as an expert in the Lee Plan as well as the Land Development Code, and I wish to do so today.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. It looks like I forgot my copies of the PowerPoint at my desk, but I will get that to you. I do have that for you. The case before you today is DCi 2023-00009. It's called Blackstone Corporate Park MPD. Mr. DeLisi went over a lot of the critical points about the case. This is a 98.03 acre rezone to MPD. It's to permit 500,000 square feet of commercial development and 350,000 square feet of industrial. Staff is recommending approval. I'm just going to a little bit of history. Mr. DeLisi mentioned the 5 acres being added into the MPD as an amendment to this DCI. The MPD currently stands at 93.03 acres. It was previously approved with resolution Z07051. In that zoning resolution, it was approved for 810,000 square feet of industrial with 250,000 square feet of commercial. As Mr. DeLisi mentioned, it did go through, the MPD portion did go through a staff-initiated comprehensive plan amendment with ordinance 10-16 to approve industrial future land use category with the wetlands in there as well. The 5 acre piece was not included in that. So that still is in the urban community, which Mr. DeLisi mentioned as well. Future land use category, the project is meeting the the urban policy 1.1.4 for existing base of public services to be maintained or expanded if need be. The urban community policy is specific to the residential, commercial, quasi-public, and light industrial land uses. The industrial future land use category, Lee Plan Policy 1.1.7, is meant to strengthen the economy in Lee County, to add industrial, manufacturing, research, offices to support the industrial uses, to strengthen the economy within the county, and the location of the industrial uses within that future land use category should be close to the transportation needs, water, sewer, fire protection. This project has all of that. The transportation needs, as Yuri went over, State Road 82 is abutting along the northeast, as well as the interstate is close by for the transportation of goods and services coming from the manufacturing area within this industrial segment of the MPD. The wetlands, the applicant has gone over thoroughly. There are wetlands on site. It is in the future land use category. They may not be specific to what ground truthing shows, but the South Florida Water Management District permit that the applicant must obtain, as well as if they get a jurisdictional wetland determination, will provide the ground truthing for that. If the design of the site is impacting state wetlands, they will need to submit the mitigation how they're mitigating for those impacts to those wetlands. And that's in Lee Plan Policy 124.1.1 and 124.1.2 to show demonstrate mitigation at time of development order. Mr. DeLisi went over the surrounding land uses thoroughly. I'm not going to belabor that. The area of concern really is that residential piece that's located to the west, and the design of the master concept plan shows almost a 400-foot setback because of the preservation and because of the Lampstead Canal until you reach the industrial uses. So there is that compatibility in there with the restoration and the preservation of those areas. To the south is the DRGR, the Density Reduction Groundwater Resource Area, and it is vacant. And then as you work towards the commercial entity, you have a lake on one side, and then the preserve kind of snakes up the side along this area, along Blackstone, to give some screening and buffering. The schedule of uses for the commercial area are listed in the in the staff report, condition D. We have struck essential services facilities group 2, because that is the wastewater treatment plant in the commercial portion, area A. And then with this, we have struck group 2 in the industrial segment as well. Otherwise, the schedule of uses are in compliance with the mixed-use plan development requirements. Mr. DeLisi went through the objectives and policies to support the project for the standards for urban services as well as timing. I want to touch on this a little bit because the map you see before you shows the sewer force main lines and the potable water lines, the location of those. This is straight out of the FGUA letter. Every zoning case that staff gets in is required to provide a letter of availability, whether it be Lee County Utilities, FGUA. Those letters are not a guarantee that at time of DO that entity has set aside that threshold so that at time of DO we plug you in. It's showing at this time for the zoning case with what you're proposing, we have availability. That letter states that. That's a standard letter that we get on FGUA. It's stating first come, first serve in that letter as well. That's a standard boilerplate on every Lehigh project that we review, and we have accepted on others. Other rezones have not requested wastewater treatment plants. In Land Development Code section 10104, it's in 10104A14. B5 as well, it allows for an administrative deviation at such time of development order when you're actually rubber meets the road. We need to know the availability is there now with this use that we're proposing. You have the ability as an applicant to apply for an administrative deviation to allow that use to be allowed on the site. If that is an intensity issue, it will need to go back through zoning, may need a public hearing because of the intensity, and then you can flush that out. I want to point out that when this project originally went before the hearing examiner in 05, I think it was a Z07051 case I pulled the transcripts on that. There was services available to the site. And in the testimony by Mr. Fitzgerald, it said that there was a worry that they may not have capacity with FGUA at that time. It's the same situation now. And staff put a condition in. That was staff's condition. And that condition, and Mr. Schropp, and I have the transcripts and I have the letter from Mr. Schropp stating that Area B on that master concept plan is where the wastewater treatment plant was going. And Area B, and I'll show at the end of my presentation, and I have documents for you for that, was along, I'll get out of this, was along this area here, where it had a reduction in height, and then there was an Area B over in here, and I'll show that master concept plan at the end. But there was services available. So we approved a condition on the case that we were unsure if capacity was available. There was still dialogue going back and forth between the applicant and FGUA. There wasn't a DEP matter in that, but it was an uncertainty. Today, this does not meet the Lee plan. Those services are within a quarter mile. They need to hook up. If that time of development order, when they're running through the process for hookups for utilities, there is an issue, there's a built-in deviation that is allowed to come in to assess that. Now, I understand that for an applicant, you don't want to come back through zoning, but this is 18 years ago that this condition's been written, and we have projects that come in Lehigh that have services through the DO process. The one recent one on Meadow Road that has not been able to meet the standards at time of development order is because they're proposing a warehouse with 4 bathrooms, and they're tripping the threshold to hook up to sewer and water, and the applicant doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to extend the lines out to hook up. So it's kind of sitting, waiting for him to either make the building smaller to get underneath that threshold or provide plans to hook up. And that's on Meadow. So that's the only one that I went over the development services manager and kind of what do we have in-house that's being held up, and that was the one that was mentioned. So that's really where staff is coming from. If we start to do this on every Lehigh project because there's an issue, I mean, the letter of availability we have capacity at this time. It's not a promissory at time of DO. So it's going to set a precedence. We want to pull the condition because we have built-in code to address this when you're coming in for a DO. We can address this. We have to meet the Lee plan policy.
And what was the site of that? You said it was 10104.
10104 A14 and B as in boy 5.
And it would allow them an administrative
It's
basically, if they get through this
Correct.
process, they don't get the deviation today, and they move forward, FGUA at the time of development order is not ready, your testimony is administratively, they could come in and handle that, and because they haven't identified it on the master concept plan, they are not increasing intensity of the project because they've already anticipated development on that pad. Because if they do the temporary treatment plant, they're gonna have to put it on an area that right now they've reserved for actual development intensity.
correct.
So since they're not doing that, you were saying they don't have to come back through the public hearing process, they would be able to administratively move forward with the DO.
What it says in the code is it allows for administrative deviations if the utility provides a clear denial of services based on inadequate central facility. So right now, we have a letter saying that there's availability. If at time of DO, they they provide a letter stating that they don't have availability, they can propose the use. The intensity at that time would be addressed, and it may need to go before a public hearing, depending on what's going on with it. Because it's an increase in intensity wastewater treatment plant, we would have to look at where it's being located and compatibility purposes. And right now, what staff has reviewed, we do not show where that is going, but we have the use on the schedule of uses.
But you've proposed to remove it.
Correct.
So your testimony also, because I thought I read that was a distinction, that in the prior case, there was not a capacity or an availability by FGUA to provide it, but you're saying that was not actually.
That is incorrect. After pulling the transcripts and reading through the transcripts from Mr. Schropp and Mr. Fitzgerald, there was availability. There, it's stated on the record in the transcript, and I have them tabbed in here as to what I read.
Do you know if the sewer main was in the same location as it is now, or was that subsequent?
I could not find the letter of availability map that FGUA would have, I don't know, maybe the applicant has that, but I'm not sure about that.
I'm just trying to figure out, because if that was the case and the hearing examiner found that there was still somehow compliance or consistency with the Lee plan, if that hadn't changed, then we're in the same position we were in 18 years ago.
Correct.
In that capacity. Okay. I can review that if you have it. Do you have that?
I have the transcripts, and then I have the September 25th, 2007 letter from Russell Schropp stating, it was like a 48-hour letter going through the conditions. So I have this right here.
Does applicant have copies of those documents, or do you want them? You lived through it probably, and you don't need to relive it.
I have copies of the letter from Russell Schropp. I can get an additional copy of the transcript if you would like.
Yes, I would like to have that, please. So those would be
wants one,
staff exhibit 3 and 4.
this one, and then I tab.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So 3 will be the letter, the 48-hour letter for that case. Staff exhibit. 3, and then staff exhibit 4 is the transcript from that case. Okay.
And in that letter from Russell, there's a segment in that letter, and I have copies of that. I have a copy of that. Item D, it says the applicant requests approval of Essential Services Facilities Group 2 and Area B to accommodate the potential on-site sewer plant as provided in Condition 4 and Deviation 2. And this is the master concept plan that was cited in that, and Area B is right here along the west side, and then they have an Area B over here on the east side. And the candy cane striping on B on the legend of that master concept plan, which is also attached to the staff report, is a height reduction on that master concept plan. And so it was noted where that was going to go. So I just wanted to point those things out to you. And I have a paper copy of that master concept plan that you see before you, if you would like that to go along with that letter, if that would be helpful.
Rather than flipping back through the voluminous staff report, thank you. So that would be an addendum. I'll just include that with, staff exhibit 3.
And so that's really the point of contention between the applicant and staff. That kind of covers where we're coming from. We don't want to set a precedence where every case that comes in Lehigh, we have the wastewater treatment plant because we're unsure about hookup. Going on in commercial land uses, Mr. DeLisi went over these thoroughly with the compatibility issue, the traffic, the access, the buffering. All of this is compliant with the land development code. Policy 6.1.5, protect traffic carrying capacity. Yuri went over this thoroughly. It is on a state road. The Blackstone is a local road, and at time of development order, that will be reviewed. Policy 6.1.6, we are in the Lehigh Acres community, and it kind of straddles buffering for Lehigh Acres as well as in Chapter 10. They are meeting those requirements. Industrial land uses, the applicant is meeting the industrial land use category for policy 7.1.1, employee characteristics, lifting up the economy in the area of Lehigh, which is what they wanted, to provide some goods and services and manufacturing in that area, so you don't have to travel so far for work. The policy 7.1.2, the compatibility and screening, we went over. Proximity to workforce, it's surrounded by residential, so policy 7.1.3, and then the buffering and screening again in 7.1.6 in the industrial land use category. Lehigh Acres Community Plan, policy 25.6.1 speaks to the commercial overlay area. That is just in that 5-acre piece that's being added. They do meet the thresholds for that area to go to commercial. Policy 25.9.1 talks about the sewer and water availability in that commercial overlay on that 5-acre site. It does not have to provide availability at time of zoning, but does need to meet those policies in standard 4.1.1, 4.1.2 before development order is issued, but that's just for that 5-acre piece. Policy 25.10.1 is on-site preservation. Mr. DeLisi, Mr. Fitzgerald, as well as Mr. Johnson went over that. There are wetlands on site. Some of the wetlands can meet the indigenous definitions, some cannot. They're doing restoration. There's a restoration plan in the packet. Land Development Code Section 33-1401, they did provide a public information meeting minutes for this case. Environmental and surface water, Mr. Fitzgerald went over that thoroughly. Policy 77.3 is innovative open space design. They are providing an open space area to do triple protection for buffering, as well as their open space for indigenous, as well as providing an increased setback for that industrial from that residential use. Policy 77.3.4, which is cut off, incorporation of large contiguous open space tracts. The applicant is receiving credit in the Land Development Code in LDC 10-415C, allows for you to receive a little bump up of percentage of indigenous credit when you preserve half-acre or more. And you'll see that on the master concept plan, the credit section for the calculation. I think it was 150% credit for some of those areas. Compatibility, access, and traffic. At time of development order, the local road will be assessed if improvements need to be made, if there needs to be any turn lane or anything like that, because it is a local road. State Road 82 will be looked at from the Florida Department of Transportation review, and Lee County staff will piggyback with them on the review during the DO, making sure that our plans are matching what they're proposing as well. Urban services, we've kind of gone over the FGUA part of it. I wanted to point out that fire, EMS, and sheriff are all within 3 to 4 miles from the subject property. Lee Plan Map 3D for the bike and pedestrian facilities. 82 has been improved, so there is a sidewalk on both sides of 82. And you can kind of see that in the aerial that's on the screen. So adequate urban services are being provided and are accessible for the applicant to provide stub outs to hook into the potable water and sanitary sewer. The applicant has gone over the deviations thoroughly. Staff is carrying over the previous deviation 1. We are recommending to withdraw deviation 2. The new deviations provide a 25-foot setback for the excavation from private property. There will be a buffer in there. There will be littoral plants around those lakes, so there will be protective measures. The adjacent properties are vacant DRGR land to the south, as well as vacant TFC2 and other commercial to the east. So there will be protection measures on those properties when they come in as well for their buffering. The separation to go from 60 to 59 feet for the driveway separation, that is a LAMCID service like they went over. Public health and safety for a 1 foot, it should be okay in there for that separation. And the utilities, on the one side of the road makes sense because of the preserve. Mr. Fitzgerald went over that. That made sense. And then the 10415B, that just talks about the indigenous open space and how the wetland and upland restoration with the bonus credits to allow the wetland restoration to receive the bump up of the bonus. And those are the locations of the deviations. And with that, the findings and conclusions, staff finds it consistent with the Lee Plan Land Development Code and recommends approval as conditioned. I'm here for any questions if we have any further.
Well, I mean, the one issue remains, right, is deviation 2. And so just so I'm understanding, again, from the staff's perspective, when they come in for their DO, they have to still be consistent with the Lee Plan. So if the Lee Plan requires them to connect, that safety valve is already in place. So even if the deviation were granted today, if it's conditioned that there is connection or service available, they have to do that. They wouldn't be able to just have carte blanche availability to come in at time of DO and just say FGUA is available, but we want to do this anyway, because there would be a backstop, I guess, is what I want to be sure.
Correct, because in that land development code section, you have to provide a letter from the entity saying that there is an availability. And we haven't received anything in that in the 48-hour letter. We're just unsure. There's no written documentation saying FGUAs, well, with what you're doing out here, we do not have capacity. So you're gonna have to find a different means. We don't have that, and that's what that code requires. In order for you to get that deviation, you need to have the documentation that there's no availability. We don't have that at this time.
And again, that's why this is usually a DO issue, right? Because that specific finding it's not ripe yet, because they don't have, as you said, it's first come, first served, and they haven't gotten in line yet because they don't have a DO application that's pending. But again, going back to 4.1.2, the language that I was caught up with is it requires them to connect. It's must language, right? So they've got to connect if it's there. And then it says if the utility has sufficient capacity to provide it, then the development must connect to it if there is existing infrastructure adequate to accept it. And I think that's where this disconnect is coming, as applicant is saying, even though FGUA right now is saying they've got the capacity, they're concerned that when they come in, that second component of that test isn't going to actually be administered.
Correct.
So if that's the case, but if we could, it sounds like the way this was dealt with 18 years ago was they conditioned the deviation to say you can have your temporary treatment plant only if you can provide the letter of unavailability, and you've got to reconnect or disconnect, excuse me, as soon as that's online. But staff, it sounds like, is now uncomfortable with that same method of dealing with it.
Yeah, the temporary and what goes in with that, there's a whole other, there's a litany of things that could happen with that. Because right now we're in zoning, we're saying, yeah, you can do a temporary wastewater treatment plant. Okay, well, where's it going? What's temporary? We don't have any checks and balances on, that condition doesn't say, okay, well, if you can hook up, you have 90 days to decommission this. And what does that look like? And then what use is going into that place card holder where the wastewater treatment plant is? So there's that's why at time of DO this is dealt with, because yes, we do have a problem. Now we're going to have to deal with that problem to figure out where this is going, what we need, and then the ins and outs of that. And at that time, we're dealing with real-time issue. Right now, we're kind of like, we have a letter of availability, so why are we even contemplating this? Every case has a letter of availability, and if they have a letter that states that they don't have availability, then we would be talking about this, but we don't. We have a map that shows Blackstone has water and sewer. We have maps come in on every zoning case for letter of availability that show where that's located in the FGUA service areas. So I think it's premature. I think we're anticipating something that may not happen, and we have cases going on right now that are hooking up. So in 18 years, we've got cases that are hooking up. So there's been service increasing out there. Right now, that it's potable water that we're talking about because of the aquifers and what we're doing and how we're going to handle that. That's a bigger conversation. So, and it's being had right now, but it shouldn't affect these zoning cases because they're issuing a letter of availability.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure, sure.
back to the applicant. To provide any comments. Since there's no public commentary today to rebut, I was going to say rebuttal, but that's not appropriate today.
So, Madam Hearing, again, for the record, Richard Aiken, a couple comments in response to staff's position on deviation 2. So, first of all, the thought that this is creating precedent, I disagree with, and the reason for that is simply that it is in the existing zoning, and so I believe that the idea that we're creating precedent for every zoning that would come in Lehigh is simply not the case. I think it's a very narrow situation where what we're asking to do is bring forth a deviation that was already there based upon circumstances that, as I think we've heard, really haven't changed from the time of the original zoning. I believe that probably what we're doing today is having an entirely academic discussion, because I think my hope is that there will be capacity at the time of development order, and we're hoping that the letter of availability would be correct at that time as well. The concern is, what if it's not, right? And so I understand staff's position being that, okay, well, then they can go back and resolve it at that time. The problem with that is a couple-fold, and I was looking at 10104, and 10104B4, I believe is what it is that correct? Yes, so, or B5, would allow for an administrative deviation from sections 10352 and 10353 in the event that the utility that would otherwise serve the development cannot provide the service at the adopted level of service standard due to inadequate central facility. Okay? I think the issue there is what that's doing is it's allowing an administrative deviation from 10352 and 10353, which are the code sections that require you to connect if you meet certain flow requirements and so on and so forth, right? The secondary issue that we have here, though, is that, remember that staff is asking to strike Essential Services Group 2 from our zoning schedule of uses. Sorry, I just heard that. And so that would then, I think, put us in a situation where we might have to come back through to rezone the property again to add that schedule of use. So while we would have an administrative deviation from that one specific code requirement, we'd still have a zoning problem, right? So all we're asking for, and I just want to make it very clear, is, and we're happy to have it conditioned clearly, so that we're asking for, in the event that there isn't capacity, and we can demonstrate that FGUA says there isn't capacity, or if it's somebody else, that we would have the ability to temporarily put in a on-site package plant until such time as services did come available, and then some reasonable amount of time we can take the facility out. We're not asking to have it in, no matter what, we're not asking to have it into, with no end in sight, right? I mean, it's just the idea that, hey, we're trying to get something built. We have a time frame to do so. We have a buyer who wants to build something, but there's not capacity, which Mr. Fitzgerald testified he's had happen a few times with FGUA and Lehigh Acres. So what we're asking for is for the zoning to allow us that flexibility if we get to that point. Because even though the administrative deviation would allow us flexibility from sections of the code, it wouldn't allow us flexibility from the zoning. We'd still have to then come back, re-add the use, Essential Services Group 2, which would, by the time we got through that process, it might be resolved, or, I mean, you're talking about another significant delay. So we're trying to address it now. We're trying to be a little bit proactive instead of reactive to the situation. I do understand staff's concern. We're not trying to create precedent in Lehigh Acres. We're just trying to think about how do we solve this issue. We're happy to have it conditioned in such a way that it is clear that it would be temporary only if services were not available, which the code already talks about there being an ability to get an administrative deviation from the code requirement to hook up for that. So we're just trying to make sure that we don't create a zoning problem that then creates a double layer fix at a later time, if that makes sense.
And is there not, because you did testify you've done this before, I thought the code did have somewhere the 90-day requirement that you spoke about. I thought there was somewhere that if there's a temporary treatment facility that there was, are you familiar, or can anyone direct me where that might be, if that's already something that's addressed in the code, or would that be something that would need to be conditioned? Because that is one of staff's concern, is what does the word temporary mean if you're just going to be able to construct it and maintain the operation? I don't need a specific answer. I just didn't know, because you had been through it before, if that was something that you recalled having gone through that process. Yes, thank you.
If I may, Ron Inge again. On both of those two instances where we've had the plants, there didn't need to be a time limit, so to speak, because I was anxious to remove that, because then it created saleable property that I could do something with. So there's a financial incentive for me to remove that as quickly as possible. And as to the thought that we might just put one out there even if service is available, that economically would not make sense. Why would we spend money for a plant when the facilities are there across the street? It would tie up property, it'd tie up funds for no reason. So there's a lot of financial incentives as to why it would be temporary and only if needed. Thank you.
Madam Hearing Examiner, to your question about is there something in the code about ceasing operations within 90 days, I don't know. As I stand here before you, I was just doing a quick search to see if I could find it. I don't have that answer. Dan, do you? No. Okay. The last thing on the, well, this is, the last point I would just make on the issue of the location of it, because I know Ms. Workman brought it up, was that previously the use area B was over here. The proposal that we made to staff was to just move it to industrial use area B, which is here. We think it's more compatible with in this area than it would be over here, which would be closer to the residential, especially with that preserve. So I don't think that's really an issue. I just wanted to point that out. So if you have any other questions, we'll be happy to answer them, but I think that pretty much covers it.
I think we have covered it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does staff have any final comments?
I do have the section of code for you. It's in section 10-352, potable water systems. And it is under, hang on, I gotta scroll. Private systems, B. Oh, hang on a second,
Beth,
that's
10
potable.
353.
353 is
Same.
sanitary, sorry, I'm scrolling. I'm scrolling here.
I have 10-353 printed and I still can't put.
And it says in B as in boy, individual sewage disposal systems 2, the system approved under subsection B1 of this section must be removed or abated in connection to the utility must be made not more than 90 days from the date the utility provides written notice to the property owner that sanitary sewer service is available at the boundary of the development and connection is mandatory. An appropriate bond or equivalent security may, at the utility's option, be tendered.
Thank you. And I had that printed, but this is why I need my glasses, because even with them, I could not locate it. So thank you very much for that assistance. I have that now. Okay. Did staff have any other final comments for the record?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so then with that, we will conclude the hearing for today. I'll be making a recommendation in this case. It'll go to the board for the final hearing. I hope everyone has wonderful, safe, and happy holidays. Thank you.
Thank you as well.